Facing the data, what the study says and what it can't capture. I recently watched Dr. Ettinson's team discussing the new 2025 article on personality and mental health, on narcissistic traits and abuse. They had a surprising headline: Narcissistic traits alone do not predict interpersonal abuse. In clear numbers, they report that total narcissism scores were essentially uncorrelated with reports of abuse. For instance, informant rated narcissism had an R value that equaled 0.09, with a P value that equaled 0.34 for abuse. In plain terms, an R of 0.09 means only a 9% overlap in variation, essentially no link, and a p-value that equals 0.34 means a 34% probability this result is just random chance, which scientists call not significant. By contrast, the same data show an R value of 0.79 and a p-value of less than 0.001 for the relationship between overall abuse and coercive control. An R value of 0.79 is extremely high, about 79% overlap, and a p-value of less than 0.01 means less than a 0.1% chance it's a fluke. In other words, abuse and controlling behaviours go together very tightly. But simply having narcissistic traits did not by itself predict who was abused in this sample. I need to explain what these stats mean in everyday language. Correlation, R, measures how strongly two things move together. So minus 1.0 is perfect, 0 is nothing. So R that equals 0.79 tells us a very strong link, about a 79% correlation between experiencing abuse and coercive control. And a p-value of less than 0.01 means there's less than 0.1% chance. That strong link is just random noise. But R equaling 0.09 is almost zero, and P equaling 0.34 means a 34% chance it's random. So it's basically no real association. The authors even note in their own words, narcissism scores were significantly related to coercive control, with an R value of 0.18, a P value equaling 0.04, but not to abuse, with an R value that equaled 0.09 and a P value that equaled 0.34. I don't say this to deny our experiences. It's eye-opening, but I see what it means. The study tells us that narcissistic personality traits by themselves aren't a reliable predictor of abuse. It's an empirical data set. This lines up with what Dr. E's concerns about moral panic over narcissists is all about, that we've painted narcissism as a code word for evil. He's right that many people have misunderstood narcissism, and that not every difficult behaviour is narcissistic abuse. This study reinforces you can't just check off narcissistic traits and assume abuse follows. But here's what I must stress. This is not a rebuttal of what they found. It's an expansion. I actually agree with Dr. Ettinson's critique of this panic. Narcissistic traits can be harmful, but they vary widely in expression. The overusage of the term narcissist has diluted the conversation drastically into outrage content, algorithm, likes, clicks, comments, and shares. Sadly, the recovery space also doesn't capture the true experience of encountering a pathologically disordered individual, nor the true nature of NPD. This dataset reminds us of that truth. However, as a survivor, I'm also thinking, what about our real experience? The study uses questionnaires and traits, great for broad trends, but it misses the inside story of how it feels like abuse and how we were wounded. That inside story is what Sam Vaknin has described for years and now MPIT captures. That the core of our trauma isn't in what you can easily count or label, but in the deep psychodynamic collapse inside the relationship. Where the statistics leave a void. Let me say this clearly. I'm grateful for the study's clarity on stats, but it doesn't make me feel any less valid about my pain. Statistics can tell us patterns across groups, but they don't capture a lived reality. For instance, DAL observed that overall personality disorder severity did correlate with abuse and control moderately. That means it was a case of the more severe the dysfunction equaled the higher the likelihood of more abuse. This hints that it's not the label of NPD per se, but rather how deeply impaired someone is in functioning. They note that once you account for overall impairment, things like self regulation, moral judgment, etc., then the bite of the data changes. In short, the relational context and the person's broad personality structure matter more than any one narcissism score. But even personality dysfunction as a concept is a bit cold. It still treats the problem as something within them. What about what happened to me in the relationship and how it changed me? Here's the big caveat. A checklist of behaviours or traits cannot measure a missing presence. It can ask, did they insult you, hit you, control your finances? But it can't ask, how empty did you feel when they withdrew their gaze? Or how lost did your sense of self become when their love vanished? That's the territory of relational injury, not merely counting whether they physically attack, but how their inner emptiness became my wound. Narcissistic abuse dynamics are not just one-way aggression. They are a dance of two psyches, and the study's questionnaire approach only captures part of the story. The MPIT lens, exploring the inner world. So what is the inner world dynamic? In MPIT terms, we talk about concepts like the introject system and the internalized dead object. The introject system is basically the set of internal images and voices we carry from others. Sam Vaknin, whose work many of us know, explains how a narcissist forces them to interject him to create an internal object which represents him in the victim's mind. In everyday language, they trigger you to carry around a piece of them in your psyche. That internal voice is not your own. It's their echoes, often judgmental or critical, replaying inside your head long after they're gone. The study never measured that. It didn't ask what voices we hear inside. Then there's absence as an affective wound. Vaknin states narcissists are essentially dead at the core because they internalized a dead object, often from their own childhood. In a relationship, we end up loving something that feels dead inside. Love becomes experienced as absence. To love is not to be, as he puts it. Think about that. Love felt like a void, not a presence. The narc's withdrawal or devaluation creates a profound archaic wound. Vaknin vividly says the dead object cannot reciprocate, injures you all the time. The archaic wound, a death by 1,000 cuts. This is poetic, but it nails it. Our injury is in how we're left caring for an empty shell of a person, feeling the pain of that absence. Additionally, MPIT uses terms to describe how our psyche reacts. For example, the ASR complex refers to how our stress response system gets constantly triggered. So we're always on edge, fear knee-jerk reactions on high alert. In practical terms, it's why a survivor might feel panicky at minor conflicts or imagined slights. Your ASR complex, or anticipatory stress reflex, is hijacked. Then there's CIPR, collapse induced psychotic regression, a move back to pre verbal organisation. This sounds dramatic, but many survivors have felt like part of their mind went to pieces under the trauma. It's as if when the narcissist collapsed, our shared fantasy or pulled away utterly, a part of us regressed or disconnected as a basic survival tactic. I've been there. Suddenly I couldn't recognise my own thoughts or felt unhinged. That's CIPR in action. I've also talked about RMPI, reflexive mirrored psychic inversion. This describes how we mirror the narcissist's view, inverting our own. They see us as contemptible or worthless, and bit by bit, the reflection of us becomes how we see ourselves. It's like looking in a funhouse mirror that flips everything. We start catching ourselves acting like them or feeling tangled up in their emotions instead of our own. Another piece is IMRA, inverse mirrored reflexive apathy. In practice, that is the numb, dead feeling you have when a piece of your soul feels killed by the relationship. It's not just sadness, it's like an inner part of you goes dead inside, reflecting apathy back to everything. Perhaps you've experienced that shock of indifference, where nothing seems real, or you can't cry anymore, even though you're hurting deeply. IMRA captures that dissociative numbness that we survivors sometimes slip into. All these terms are clinical sounding, but behind each is a very clear idea. Our internal system is traumatized in ways that a personality trait survey just can't catch. The introject system, we build an internal image of the narcissist. Vaknin calls it an internal object. They keep living inside our heads after leaving us. The dead object, the absent wound, we end up relating to a part of them that is empty or dead. Vaknin notes the narcissist carries a dead mother inside, and we feel wounded by relating to that dead core. Love felt like absence, not presence. The ASR complex, our stress, anxiety reflex, is on constant alert. We feel ongoing persecutory fear or hypervigilance because our body remembers the chaos. Collapse-induced psychotic regression. Under the breakup or betrayal, a part of us may emotionally shut down or dissociate, almost like a mini psychotic break, because our mind is overwhelmed. Reflexive mirrored psychic inversion. We start to unconsciously take on the narcissist's twisted perspective, inverting our own self-view and values, as if we see ourselves through their distorted mirror. Inverse mirrored reflexive apathy. We feel empty inside, deadened, apathetic. A part of us just becomes numb to cope. The inverted grandiosity gap. In reaction to the narcissist's grandiosity, we experience our own self as extremely small or worthless. We may try to compensate by creating a false self, a facade we put on to feel bigger or safe. We build a mask or alternate identity to cope. It might be an inflated bravado to match them, or an overly compliant shadow, but it's not our genuine self. Vaknin even says children of dead parents may have an imaginary friend, the false self, which is a striking image of how we protect ourselves mentally. Each of these reflects a piece of our inner experience. The studies measures checklists of behaviours and trait ratings don't tap these. Yet these are real processes people live through. When we talk about survivor reality, what we mean exactly this. We survive by building those complex inner defences, and we're wounded in these specific ways. The relational structure is more than the sum of traits. Let's tie this together with how the relationship actually works. The study confirms something crucial. It's not just about the abuser's traits, but how those traits interact with us. Narcissistic abuse is a dance. It involves love bombing and idealization, then devaluation, mimetic palindromic speech patterns in a push-pull that only makes sense in the context of our bond. Statistical models call some of this coercive control, but there's also a psychological illusion they create. In our relationships, the narcissist behaviour combines with our vulnerabilities. They mirror a fantasy for us. At first, we feel adored or saved and in love. Then they collapse it. MPIT calls that the collapse of the shared fantasy, triggering extreme distress. The core psychodynamic collapse happens when we finally see the narcissist isn't the hero of our story, but a hollow character. That moment isn't captured by an R value. It's an existential rupture. Think of it this way. The study looked at abuse like independent, countable acts. But for survivors, the pattern and what it did to us is the injury. We carry injuries of betrayal, ongoing betrayal, abandonment, ongoing abandonment, and identity shattering, ongoing identity shattering. The numbers might show no predictive link with simple traits, and that's statistically correct because the damage is actually due to a complex interplay. The narcissistic traits matter, but only as part of a relationship matrix. For example, gaslighting by equivalency might not show up as narcissistic trait equals high gaslighting on a survey, but it shatters the victim's trust in reality. Idealization followed by withdrawal and rage doesn't get captured by narcissistic entitlement equals number, yet it traumatizes. In short, survivors know it's the relational structure, the way the narcissist utilized us for external regulation and then vanished. That wounds us more than any one trait on a checklist. This is why I agree with the study's data, but I also add the caveat. The real site of injury is the survivor's internal world, not the checklist of abusers' behaviours. So, in conclusion, this is about expanding the conversation. Let me close by emphasising I deeply respect that this research pushes back against overgeneralising the narcissist equals abuser narrative. Dr. Ettinson isn't saying nobody gets hurt. I want to make that very, very clear. He's saying quite the opposite. He admits that some people with NPD do cause a lot of pain. But he is also saying scientifically, clinically, we need nuance. I agree wholeheartedly with that call for nuance. But I want to add, for myself and anyone listening, is that our validation as survivors comes not from those trait questionnaire results, but from understanding the nature of our trauma. Empit and Vaknin gives us language to describe how we internalize that absence, how our self-concept collapsed and flipped inside out, and how we built a false self just to breathe. The study's findings don't negate our pain, they illuminate the pain has different dimensions. As Sam reminds us, the narcissist treats us like a dead object, and in loving them, we learn to love a dead mother. That is the wound for many survivors. The study didn't measure the deadness or the loss of self, it counted behaviours. We add the human story behind those behaviours, the shattered introjects, the indelible psychic inversions, the inverted grandiosity in our own soul. That is where true healing must focus. This is not to argue against the science or Dr. Ettinson, but to bring it together with the science to say, yes, I see your data on traits and abuse, and here's my inner world that those numbers couldn't show. And in that spirit, we carry forward the shared respect for thinkers like Vaknin and Mark Ettinson, and honour that both empirical evidence and deep psychodynamic insight have their place. Together, they give us a fuller map of the journey through narcissistic abuse, not just out of moral panic, but into true understanding of where the real wounds lie. The absence caused deeper wounds than all the other abuses combined. That's why it doesn't take violence to devastate another human being. Peace out. Loads of love.